like
There's
yeah.
a whole front row. Poor Justin by himself. He needs to come
I'm okay with my father-in-law. He has a homestead.
well, I want to thank you all for being here, especially our speakers that are joining us and our moderator tonight. So thank you very much. This is the first part in a 4-part series hosted by Originate, which is where I work. I'm our director of marketing, along with BCG Digital Ventures and the UCLA Anderson Venture Accelerator.
You got it right.
I got it right. Our next talk, which I invite you all to, is going to be on May 7th on the topic of food and disruption and innovation in that space. So we'll be exploring cannabis, supply chain, restaurant business, and sort of what's happening around there. I also invite you to join us following this for some networking. We'll have some food, more drinks, and I think with that I'll let Mickey, Executive Director of Grade 110, take it over.
Awesome, thanks. Is this thing on? Cool, awesome. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm excited to be back myself on campus. I'm a Bruin grad. It's always good to be back here, go Bruins. So I'm really excited about this series, but also specifically this topic of conversation, as it seems like you all are today. When I give career advice to people, I always talk about strive to be the dumbest person in the room, and I feel like I'm definitely winning right now. We have a stellar panel assembled today to talk about the topic of flying cars. And so would love to kind of kick off and let them introduce themselves. So name, company, and what year do you think you're going to be in a flying car?
Okay, I'll start. So I'm Fabian Scalzo. I'm a professor here in computer science and neurology. I'm interested in AI. So I use AI to understand how we learn and how we can use learning to improve healthcare in general. And through that, I've built robots to help diagnose brain injuries. So that's something I'm very interested in. And so that's the link through self-driving cars or autonomous vehicles. And one other aspects is my PhD. My PhD was in computer vision, so we were trying to recognize people, and so that's something that's very useful with autonomous vehicles. I'm not sure when when I'm going to fly in the car. It depends on the definition of it, but it could be, I would say, within
Hi, hey everyone. I'm Randy Villahermosa. I'm a general manager and director of innovation at the Aerospace Corporation. We're a federally funded research and development center just down by the airport. We have 50 years of history building, well, we don't actually build them, but we help the government build satellites and rockets. Just about every single government launch, every single government satellite system we've in one way or another been involved in. How many people remember engineers?
One of them?
Or how many are scientists? So I can tell you that I was having a debate with some of my friends who are scientists, and I said, well, we're at a bar. And I said, you use whatever line you want, it doesn't matter. If you just tell them that you stood on a rocket, it'll win every time. So, dude, you're such a dork, that's never going to work. And sure enough, it's pretty awesome to stand on a rocket, so I've had the opportunity to do that. What we do in my office, we're the head of our innovation unit. We're all about accelerating game-changing technologies, accelerating emerging technologies, so it's really exciting to be talking about flying vehicles or flying cars, depending on your perspective. I think I will be in a flying car exactly 4 years, 235 days from now, because I'll be turning 30. And that's how I'm going to celebrate my 30th birthday. One way or another, that car's going flying.
No pressure.
No pressure.
All right, I'm Mark Moore. I'm at Uber, and I'm the director of vehicle systems there. So I'm in charge of making sure these flying cars show up by 2023, because we have 5 different partners that are developing prototypes for us. And I came from NASA. I was at NASA for 32 years, developing the entire time vertical takeoff and landing technologies. That's all I've ever done, all I've ever loved in terms of my career. And so I've cheated. I've already been in one, and I've flown one, and they're very, very real. And I can tell you that commercially, they will be available by the end of 2023 in Dallas and LA. At least the first 50 aircraft.
How was it? Was it good?
It is amazingly quiet compared to a helicopter. Now, albeit helicopters are pretty bad, but incredibly efficient, incredibly quiet, and breathtakingly beautiful.
So we were just sidebarring about like, what do we say? Like to be in this business, it's a young man's game. And then like Randy humble bragged that he's like barely like 25 or something right now.
Actually, I'm Benjamin Button right now. So I'm actually 24 right now.
Woo! So my name is Marcel Porras. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for LADOT. I'm a double Bruin. History, Latin American Studies, undergrad, and urban planning for my master's degree. I work for LADOT. I've been there for the last 4 years. I started my career with the city working in the office of a young, idealistic dude who was just a little bit older than me, and Derek Garcetti. He was a city council member at the time. And he had the foresight to bring on just some really smart people to his team to think about transportation. And so started there and followed him into the mayor's office and was his associate director of transportation for a minute. Before moving over to LADOT as the Chief Sustainability Officer, which total position was a beneficiary of the vision of the mayor to create sustainability positions in all of the city departments, right? And so I look at sustainability through the lens of mobility, and most recently got the opportunity to help, just made some like org chart moves to create this Bureau of Transportation Technology, which is a response to what's happening in our cities now, right? In terms of the disruption around mobility, showing up in our cities every day, and really have been following the trailblazing that Salita Reynolds, who is our general manager at LADOT, and really is kind of a national figure right now in the space around mobility and technology. And the biggest project I'm working on right now, because I feel that urban aviation is like over there, is like scooters. But I think from a very nuanced level is like the digital architecture required for cities to manage right of way, so that we can welcome and understand the private sector in terms of these new business models about scaling fast, right? And so if cities are to come and leverage the investment from the private sector, then we need to understand what's happening in real time, because the existing rules about how we hire staff and bring stuff on is not adequate enough to be responsive to all the innovation ideas that are out there on the streets.
And what year will you be in a flight?
Oh, by the time for the Olympics for sure, because that's got to be it.
2028.
2028 for sure.
Cool. So I think to give some context to this conversation, we talked about like what does it actually mean? What is a flying car? What does that mean to all of us? I think there's different definitions for it. For me, when I first heard about this, I was like, oh, the Jetsons. That's my context for it from long, long ago. And so I wanted to kind of start with Mark, because I think you are obviously kind of leading the forefront in one concept of what this means in terms of urban aviation and transportation, of what does a flying vehicle, car look like to Uber. And I think you have a video that you want to show. So if you'd like to talk about it real briefly, and then we can show the video.
Sure, you can do both at the same time. So I'll give the nerdy definition. The flying car is an eVTOL, an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Coming from NASA, we like to put an acronym to everything. But they are a new breed of aircraft that are far superior than helicopters in terms of safety, noise, efficiency, and productivity, or speed. And really are the key enabler of what we call urban air mobility. This ability to rise above the gridlock that's choking our major metropolitan areas and provide a new choice in transportation. But they are electric, They are focused on a mass transportation market, all electric from the beginning, to break away from the bonds of hydrocarbon fuels and provide a forcing function for the utilities to give us the green solutions that we need.
Cool, and I think we have a video that basically will help us visualize what it means to be.
Sure, and we call this Closer Than You Think because this is really going to surprise you how quickly this is all coming together. These vehicles are already flying in test flights. This is meant to show you a typical user experience because honestly, Uber doesn't care about cool technologies. They care about providing magical user experiences in transportation and as many choices as possible. So this is just one choice. As you say, micro-mobility is huge and important, and scooters and bikes and trains and light rail and hyperloop, all of it's important, and as many options as we can give these users, we want to. Let people choose how to get around in the best way that meets their specific trip. So this is for trips that are on the order of 25 miles to get across LA, and instead of being stuck in traffic for an hour and a half, you can get there in less than 10 minutes. And to be able to start stitching together transportation into multi-mode solutions so that you can, in one push of a button, have an UberX show up and take you to that Uber Air and get you to a door-to-door solution, and that involves a metro or a train, so be it. Let's stitch it all together into magical experiences that provide high productivity to our cities that are the economic engines in the United States. Now try to argue with that.
I'm going to try.
Set myself up.
So you classify this as a piloted fleet managed?
Absolutely.
Right.
If you're all about safety, and we are, you need to constrain where you're operating these vehicles to specific locations, which we call skyports. You need to start with pilots and prove autonomy in the future as it earns its way to be in control of the vehicle. But very much similar, we've modeled our operations similar to commercial aviation, which is the gold standard for safety of 10 to the minus 9th reliability, 100 times safer than automobiles on the streets.
So I'd love to open it up to the rest of the panel. Sounds like
Yeah.
has something to say about that in terms of other alternatives or other things that are happening that are in the works or other ways of thinking about flying cars.
So one of my favorite movies is Back to the Future, and that's something I grew up with. Maybe when you were born.
I found this weird thing that looked like a weird shoebox. It was black and it had all these cogs in it.
Is it big?
Yeah, I think so.
So I grew up in Belgium. That's why I have an accent, and I speak French. And in Belgium, believe it or not, that in at least 80 years ago, they had a mass transportation system that was electric and that was accessible for everyone, and that could make thousands of people travel every day for very, very cheap and very low carbon footprint. It's called a train. And so those are actually very hard to beat, right? Like, so when you think about large cities and you think about long-term energy cost and sustainability, I mean, of course, we cannot beat that, right? I mean,
Well, but as long as you live on a pathway, they're hard to beat. But if you actually want to distribute where you go, they're easy to beat.
okay. Well, that's, I mean, so that's one. But that's just to put it out there and to start, like, the argument about energy, and because that's something that's very important today. The other thing is the cool factor. Like what I would say, this is when I entered the cinema, when I watched Back to the Future, I was like, wow, I need to be in a flying car. That's unbeatable, right? So I agree. Like, this is something we want to be in. Like, we want to try it. We want to use it. But I think the argument of saying this is going to make the environment better, we're going to save time, and well, there are other solutions that are very competitive and that have been proven in many big cities over the last 50 years. be very efficient. So I think we have to manage our expectations. And I wanted to also come back to something that I realized today. Actually, the idea of a flying car is not new, right? So we have, and it turns out that Leonardo da Vinci died 500 years ago, exactly 500 years ago in the month. And I'm like, he was the one who, the modern idea of a flying car. And today with the technology, we are very close to it. We can do it. We can achieve it. But I feel like because we have built up so much expectations over 500 years, with all these cool movies that have shown us that we could take off from our backyard, and I think the expectations that we have are so high that we will have we will be disappointed a little bit. So I think it's important to have these kind of events where we use it's important to manage the expectations.
Well, it kind of reminds me of this totally random story. This guy walks into an emergency room. This is like early 80s. He goes to the doctor and says, "My head hurts. I think I have a nail in my head." And the doctor's like, "You're insane." Because he's thinking, in order to get a nail in your head, you got to put a nail up to your head and you got to like hammer it in. And you're going to be hammering this like 4 times. What do you mean you think you have a nail in your head? Well, it turns out back in the 80s, they didn't have these things called nail guns, where you could just have it, and it turns out this nail gun landed on his head. He didn't realize that the nail actually went into his head, so sure enough, it took an X-ray, like, holy crap, there's a nail in your head. Why he let the thing fall on his head is a totally different story. But my point is this, is that to me, the Uber concept looks really great, because you guys have mapped out this entire ecosystem, and you're using all the existing infrastructure, airways, but it also feels, sorry, I hate to say this, it feels a little linear to me, because if I think about it, I go, okay, what if instead we got rid of, you're not allowed to use any more rubber tires on cars. You can still use all the same roads, but you can't use rubber tires. Well, okay, well maybe we should use these flying cars, but they only stay like a foot off the ground. I don't have to maintain the roads anymore. There's no wear and tear. I don't have to build tracks or electric lines for trains. I just need to have clear airspace. So to me, I always kind of look at all these jerks who are flying down the freeway on the carpool lane. They think I'm the jerk because I'm not carpooling. You know, Tesla, sorry. But then, well, what if that was like what if that was a flying car lane? And you sort of, so I'm kind of curious, you guys are going down this path of taking advantage of airways, but have you guys looked at other models for what you would do with that technology?
Oh yeah, so I'm desperate to answer this question.
Yeah.
Because this is a great question, and it's like flying cars are sexy and fun to talk about, but really what's awesome to talk about is network sciences. And this is much more, I'm going to say one thing here that's much more important than anything about flying cars, and that is what we're developing and what we're doing is transcending pathway-based transportation and going to nodal-based transportation. And that is what is important. So I'll give you an example.
All right, lay it on.
Where, let's say you've got this flying car that flies a foot off the ground.
Yeah.
It's still based on a pathway-dependent infrastructure. Let's say you have light rail. Let's say you have Hyperloop. All of it is pathway-dependent transportation. So let's say, let's use light rail as an example. You've got 20 stops, and all on a linear pathway, so you better just want to go on that linear pathway and never anyplace else. You have one more stop. Guess what you get? One more stop. Let's say you have a 20-node Skyport network, and you add one more Skyport. What do you get? 20 new routes. That is the power of node-based transportation. It transcends this pathway dependency that is ant trails on the ground that will limit us, that will constrain us, that will gridlock us, and we have to rise above it. That's what's so powerful about what we're doing. It's scalable, it's high throughput, it's where the future is in terms of getting around and getting around fast.
Marcel, I'd love to kick it over to you, just from the government side in the city of how you have approvals to execute this type of technology here in LA and Uber is piloting here. Who else is doing stuff in this space?
Well, I feel like, before I answer that question, I think that the question that, and this is just Marcel as like a planner, is like, should everyone have the right to be able to travel as fast as they want, where they want, at any time? I don't know, right? Like, it is exciting, right? And it is, and I think that's the interesting part about kind of innovating and providing that, because it might be passenger service, but it might be emergency service, right? There might be other things, right, in terms of how we look at creating resiliency for cities, right? But I think like nothing is going to be better for me than like just walking out of my house and walking 2 blocks to like run my errands, right? And like see people and interact with people and engage with people, right? Like that, I think at the end of the day, is like that's revolutionary, right? In some cities, right? Like not in a lot of cities, but in LA, sometimes it can feel revolutionary, right? Like I came out to the west side because I'm like, first of all, it's UCLA. So I live in Echo Park, and I live in downtown, and I could choose that. But there's also all these other questions about affordability, gentrification, right? Like what happens when you do, in LA, build a rail line, right, into a low-income community? Like what happens and what kind of displacement happens, right? And so I think Uber is amazing at user experience, right? Like I think TNCs and like all this company like have really capitalized on something that cities have failed to do in a way. Like sometimes in the city, like taking a bus still sucks, right? So many of my friends who are women are like, I don't go on Metro anymore because I don't feel safe, right? But like we have stopped thinking about how do we solve that, and like we're like, let's go do Uber, let's do helicopters, right, or flying cars. And I think there is an importance to kind of support innovation, because it could, like that innovation can help like people imagine like, okay, well, what if just Metro did that, right, on their buses or on the rails, or or like scooters. Like how is scooter changing the way someone feels about mobility, right? Like, it's fun if you're not breaking your wrist or arm, or like it's fun, right? And so I think that's the kind of part that I love about all this. But I think that it's really important because these are some of the things that cities have to think about, right? And like what are the unintended impacts of these new innovations, right? And so what is cities' role to like not say, I was at a city council meeting, a budget meeting last year, where we were making a request to invest in staffing and technology around autonomous vehicles. And one of the electeds was like, I don't want AVs. And they were not going to vote for our budget package. Sir, like, AVs are permitted, like there is stuff in the works. Like we can't just turn around and say no to innovation. We have to engage innovation, and at the same time kind of build the case and engage with the private sector to say, these are some of the things that you're missing that are going to be a pain point. So how do we work together upstream to influence your product design? And so that's kind of what, where we see the city role, because cities know what are good for cities, and we're like FAA is not going to want to manage flights like in LA, right? That may be impacting neighbors and communities, and particularly if there is a potential to truly ramp up, I think, to the scale that a lot of the folks investing in this technology would like it to. So.
Can I piggyback on that for 1 second? And that is, I love what you. It is. How can you beat a magical transportation experience than walking 2 blocks to get wherever you want? I totally agree with you, and that is the long term that we're going after. Where just think about it. If you could have a nodal-based transportation system where each node provides this immediacy of access, but at any time you can jump to another node. That is the vision that we're after creating. Because guess what? You can't make all of Los Angeles within a 2-block radius. But what if you could have access portals that let you jump from node to node around Los Angeles and still have that magical 2-block living scenario?
So I think we talked about piloted. Let's talk a little bit about autonomous. I'm curious to hear thoughts on the degrees of where this goes in the future for flying cars. So piloted, autonomous, self-driving at any point. And Fabian, we talked about this a little bit briefly in terms of the work that you do with computer visioning and on the autonomous side. Is that something that you see being a viable option?
Yes. Well, so I'm not going to say it right, but I think it's even better. So we are terrible drivers. So if we want to be in a flying car, either we need to have a professional pilot, which is kind of the approach Uber has, where you have a trained helicopter pilot who's on it. Or you have a computer, an AI system that will be safe and will bring you to the destination in a timely manner, right? So I think the AI has made it's been crazy. Like the last few years, we are very close to, right now to have some like driving cars that are like more reliable and more safe than any driver we are. And that's even if the AI makes one mistake, we still have difficulty accepting it, but the AI is not perfect. That doesn't mean that it's not better than us, right? So we have to accept that computers will become better and better. They will not stop improving. So they will be better than us at flying, for sure. Not only that, but they will be better also at traffic control. So if it scales up, so if you have all these autonomous helicopters or flying cars that are around there, it's not going to be possible to manage that by hand, right? There will not be an operator that will say, where they want me to go and what is their path and the flight route, right? So there will have to be a computer system that's safe and proven to be safe to manage that. That's something that's not, I don't think it's there yet. We're not there yet. And we are not there yet in terms of regulation. So what do we need to do to prove that the system we're going to have, that's the AI system that's going to be driving these flying cars, is going to be safe? And that's something that we will benefit from the autonomous vehicle, that the cars, for sure. And that's something that takes time. But I feel like the real question is not that for me is not the question. So AI will take over. So that's true. The problem we have is the ego, or the dream, if you want. The dream I have when I see the flying cars, I want to be the pilot. I don't want to have someone else taking the commands. I don't want the AI to drive me. I want to be on it, right? And I think that's the issue, because it's not going to be as exciting if I'm taking the commands. So I think that's I think the most important thing. They can be like mixed solutions with the AI, where you can operate in a certain limited environment, where you'll be able to turn, go left, right, accelerate, but everything will be in a box, basically, where you're not able to go outside a certain pathway inside.
So it sounds like we're really close to commercially viable options for all of us as consumers. Why aren't we there yet? What are some of the challenges or the obstacles that are in the way that prevent us? The technology exists, but what's been the limiting factor?
People. I mean, like my wife says, hey, hurry up and invent that AI. It's taking in a robot. It's going to have more feelings and emotions than you will. I said, all right, I will take the trash out. I mean, to me, we were talking the other day, and I said, hey, let's look at space. If you remember back in the days, it was all about Tang and Velcro and how amazing NASA was, and they still are. But we put man on the moon in 1969. We're coming up on 50 years of that. There's absolutely no reason we should not have a colony on Mars today. There's absolutely no reason I should be able to fly and be a space tourist and be able to do that at a drop of a dime. It's either Vegas or go to space. I should be able to do either one of those, and neither of those have happened. And to me, if you look at it, you can design these really great ecosystems, but at the end of the day, when you start to bring in the human factor, the physical factor, because the iPhone, if you look at it, it lives mostly within cyberspace. Yes, you touch it, but it operates in digital space for the most part. But once you start bringing in the physical part, then I think things get a lot more complicated. people love to blame other people. The only people who are in love with technology are technologists. Everybody else is like, my wife, she's like, I don't care what's in that phone. Can I call someone? Can I check my Instagram? That's all I care about. She's amazing, by the way. I made her sound like but that's what she does whenever she's talking about me. She's like, oh, I'm a scientist. So the human factor, I think, is the biggest part because you look at all these technologies and you're like, it's not that folks are going to want to fly in cars. If you look at like Tesla, right, huge penetration within California, but not so much the rest of the depending on which study you believe, Teslas are better for the environment in California, but not necessarily the East Coast because they're cold. So you start doing all the math, and you're like, okay, yes, early adopters will always grab on the technology. I'm in that group. I'm the sucker who will love to do anything new. But then at the end of the day, people are like, okay, does it help me do something? And if it doesn't help me do something, and if I don't, or if it makes me look like a jerk. Because, I love the network model, don't get me wrong, but it has a capacity issue. And then I go in my backyard and I look at these ants that are driving me crazy. They like those 3 commands. Piss people off, go everywhere, do that over and over again. And they just follow each other, and they get amazing things done. And you're thinking, like, we've had sprawl forever. We had mass transportation here in LA back in the 50s. And we now have cars, and people want to get away from the city. It's always back to the people. So, to me, that's why I'm like, hey, if we're going to see flying cars penetrate, it's because someone has said, well, I was just joking with you, and I did the math, like what the break-even point is. But even if you came in at the break-even point, I'm like, I don't know. You're right, though. Because when I drive around, everyone is an awful driver. And I let them know it. Because every time I'm on a call, like, everyone thought that, yeah, everyone's like, hey, why is everyone honking at you? And they finally realized that I was communicating with everybody else how disappointed I was in their driving. So that's why I think at the end of the day, if you haven't solved a problem that touches a lot of people, you'll definitely penetrate with early adopters, but then what do you do from there?
Okay. So the core question is, what are the challenges, right? And so I will first respond to you and say there is a societal need, right? What's the average highway speed during peak hours in Los Angeles?
Don't know.
20 miles an hour, right? What's the projection for 20 years? It's going down. It's definitely going down. We cannot keep extrapolating on this private ownership car model. It doesn't work. The 3 key challenges could not have been overcome even 5 years ago. And there are 3 things. 1, the technology. I know the technology. I invented the technology. It is ready to be commercialized. It did not exist even 5 years ago. Of distributed electric propulsion, precise digital fly-by-wire systems that's ready to go into these aircraft today. They're already flying. The second one is the business model. 7 years ago, Uber didn't even exist. On-demand mobility did not exist. Being able to get a ride at the touch of a button did not exist. You cannot, if you don't have a last mile solution, you can't do what we're talking about. That exists now, didn't exist 7 years ago. Third one is the regulation. Up until just 2 years ago, the FAA had prescriptive requirements on how you certify small aircraft. They were onerous. You want to introduce a new technology, it's a decade. So guess what? Nobody introduced new technologies in small aircraft. The FAA has gone from prescriptive standards to consensus-based standards. That is all the difference to being able to open the door to every one of these new technologies that NASA has developed in a very quick time frame. So you combine the business model, the regulatory change, and the technologies, and you have the 3 ingredients for it to happen now when it could not have happened even 5 years ago.
What was the question?
Why hasn't this happened yet? And maybe you can also speak from the government side or
Just Marcel. I think it's, the private sector's got to be there, right? There's got to be commercial viability for it or vision there, right? And so I think that's one that you're starting to see that. I think what you're talking about in terms of all of the mobility innovation that's happening, it's creating an ecosystem for that to support that. I think that there is going to be a learning curve for government, right? And communities. I think we're starting to acknowledge that and understand that and prepare for that as a city. We in order to enable ourselves to respond quickly to technology opportunities, we put together a bench, so a consulting bench that which for those of you who have to do with procurement, an RFP can take a city like 12 months, 18 months to get out. And so we said, what if we actually just pre-approve like 100 companies that can focus, one of them can focus on electrification, some of them can focus on shared mobility, some of them on data and AI. And then one of those was specifically that we created was for community-based organizations. Because we felt that if we're going to be deploying new technologies into communities, that we should be working with community-based organizations to roll that out and just to start doing education about how that should roll out. And so like that's just us trying to prepare and be ready, but I think it's something that we need the product, right? Like we need to, okay, what are we gonna roll out with? And I think we're now starting to see more and more companies saying, okay, can we talk, right? And I think we've started to show up in different places where we weren't before. And I can talk, I think that has been a standard of like the general mayor's office and elected offices to be in places where they can meet entrepreneurs, particularly when you talk about like the economic development side. But I think to put a city department and to kind of flip the switch where we're not going, we still send staff to like planning conferences, but now we're also going to Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, we're going to CES, we're talking, and we're going and taking meetings with companies and saying, what's it going to take? What do you need? How can we map out what you envision as some of the roadblocks, and let's brainstorm about that. It's not enough to just say, no, we don't want you, right? Because private sector has a lot more money than LADOT does to lobby and say, we're going to do this, right? And they have the power of imagination, right? Like that video, like I want that.
So I'm going to keep it with you.
Sure.
What are some of the implications that maybe you've heard from the community groups that you're working with, from us as humans living here in Los Angeles, that the effects that this could have on us?
Birds. They're worried about the birds. What's going to happen to the birds? Like that's what we hear so much. They're worried about the birds, and I think that is...
Are you talking birds, animals, or birds with scooters?
Birds and animals.
Okay.
They're like, what is going to happen to the birds, right? Like, what's going to happen? And so we have not, like, that bird, someone who studies birds?
If you've ever lived in Pasadena,
We have a lot of scientists in this room.
you would know that there's these parrots from like 1950s.
Oh, the wild parrots.
Yeah. How are you going to feel if one of those gets taken out so that I can make it to LAX just a little bit quicker so I can before my flight?
We got to let everyone know where we're going to drink after.
Is there anything else from a
Yeah, so
landscape standpoint?
I think questions are like, disproportionate impacts to communities. That's always the thing, right? Like, already, you have folks that have been disproportionately impacted by travel paths right now. Right? Like, I grew up, not me, but like, I grew up every day seeing, planes fly over my head, and like, is that impacting me? Right? So those are things that are, we have to think about from a kind of an equity standpoint. And like, we also have to toe this line between supporting innovation, but then also as a city, being like, are you providing geographic equity? Are you providing, what is the benefits to the rest of, I don't want to say the 99%, but like, I think initially that it's going to be for a certain type of consumer, right? And so those are some of the questions that we work here.
Great segue to the curveball question I'm going to throw at Mark. So I know Uber has done the Uber helicopter. So if you're going to Coachella or Palm Springs, so accessibility and pricing and affordability for people.
Right.
Can you give us an idea of what that looks like?
Yeah, so that's Uber Chopper. And we have done it as pilot experiments to understand operations, the real world implications. And so I would start by saying this statement, and that is Uber has no interest in niche markets. They don't make money for us. They're profit losers, not winners. So we're not doing this for the macho elite. We are doing this from the beginning, designing the system to be scalable, to be high throughput, to be economically available to the masses. If we thought anything else, it wouldn't be funded because there's just no point in doing it. So there's a lot of challenges, as I mentioned, to get to that. But we have done a lot of economic analysis, a lot of demand studies that show there is a clear path to a major market that will provide valuable transportation and productivity to the cities and the customers that we want to serve. So that is very much our intent. And I'll just go back to what I said before. You've got to realize we cannot continue to extrapolate from the current solution. We have been locked into a private car ownership model for 100 years. It has to end. So I will tell you, turn off the camera. Not really. Uber's secret ambition is to make private car ownership obsolete. That no rational person would do it because we need to get rid of these freaking cars and open up and get to this wonderful, you can walk where you want or you can jump to nodes, and everybody does not need to own a car. Well, guess what? We cannot convince people to do that unless we can have a comprehensive, complete transportation solution so that you don't want to own your car anymore. Instead, when you need a scooter, you can get a scooter. When you need an UberX, you can get an UberX. When you need to go 40 miles across town, and you go, oh my gosh, an UberX is going to take me 2 hours. Do I really want to be listening to a driver talk to me for 2 hours? And instead, I want to get there in 10 minutes. We have to provide a comprehensive transportation solution, which includes connecting to city services, which we're doing in some areas, buses, trains, metro. Comprehensive solution so you don't want that car anymore, and then all sorts of wonderful things are possible. And part of the solution is being able to do long trips across metropolitan areas that again are our productivity engines in the United States. We can't turn, I've been to Sao Paulo 4 times. We cannot turn into Sao Paulo, which is stuck, just stuck, and does not let productivity continue to thrive in major metropolitan areas. Are you convinced?
So we're gonna hold questions to Larry. Fun fact, I have lived in LA for 20 years. I live in downtown LA. I've been car free for the past 3 years. Thanks to Uber, Lyft, and DOT. I take the metro all the time. Anybody else here carless? So the shift is happening. I see it happening. It's becoming more viable because of all the different options happening. So next question is, why wouldn't we get there? What are major roadblocks or challenges that are in the way that could prevent this from happening? And I'm going to have other people besides Mark answer first. Anyway.
I think glasses is the one. I mean, the accessibility part. I think Google Glass. I mean, why didn't Google Glass work? Technology's getting better. It wasn't absurdly expensive. Man, it was in your face. But someone is like thinking that they'd rather have that tech in front of you, and you're not really knowing what you're doing. I mean, to me, I think it's just like, why is, if you guys have seen the reports of, not in California, obviously, but other places, the supercharging stations for Tesla are getting blocked by gasoline cars. You're like, what in the world is that? That makes absolutely no sense. Yeah, not in California, but outside of California, this is life where people are like, have and have nots, and I think you could really see a really strong backlash against any perceived. We saw it with my big complaint because I take the carpool lane, but I take the toll. And one of the Metro folks was like, I'm not going to subsidize Tesla owners to be able to drive free in the carpool lane. They should have to pay like everybody else. Whether that was fair or not, and whether that actually made any sense or not, but it makes you great politics. So I think there is this element of depending on how you roll it out. So for example, if Uber said, actually, for the first year we're only going to offer this to emergency services, they're the folks who really need this the most. So you just like that car accident, we're looking for Uber Air as an So I think there's an element of that we sort of miss with technology because it's always associated with sort of higher incomes. But I do worry that it can be a pretty good backlash. So I'm sure you guys looked at that.
We've analyzed it, and unfortunately, the economics for low utilization are very, very bad. And EMS helicopters are a prime example where they do a few missions a day and they're insanely expensive. So you've got to find a way that addresses a major market and can achieve high utilization.
Yeah, I think there's an issue about scalability. Like, I mean, that's true that it's been like incredible, right? The robotics and machine learning and computer science has been like improving at an exponential rate, right, in the last few years. I think the problem is the regulation behind it. We don't have a good, basically, we don't have a way to bring it to a scale right now that is safe and that is understood by everyone. In the sense that, so let's say if we have 1,000 helicopters, we need some regulations about how do we manage that? Like, I don't think we are there today. I think, and that's something that will take time. So the technology is there, the vision is there, but the regulation and all the things that will bring it to the real world, I think it's way slower than the way technology is evolving. And so I would say that will be the major hurdle for reaching it very soon. So I think if we are able to have favorable regulations where it's not too restrictive for the technology to be used, then it's going to happen. So it doesn't look like, I mean, unless I'm not an expert in that, but we might be able to.
I think one of the things that can hurt it is like just not listening to cities, like preemption, right? I think that a lot of times, a lot of the models are like, let's just get a national bill passed or a state bill passed that just cuts cities out of the equation. And I think that is counterproductive. I think I meant like Selena Reynolds, my boss, she mentioned it. Like FAA will let you fly, but it's the city that's going to let you land, right? And so what is that role, right, for cities? And I think making sure that we are all acting in good faith as we try to figure out kind of what the next innovations are in the city, right? That actually benefit people and have like a public dialogue about it, right? Like, there's a lot of times that when we're working with private sectors and they're saying, well, you should have a public dialogue on it, but there's a big, like the city should do that, right? And I think it's very convenient to put it on the city to do that when a lot of folks are like not holding themselves to the same standard. But I think that in terms of some of the early stuff that I've seen working with companies, I think the vision is there, and I think convening people, and I think Selena spoke at Uber Elevate this past year, and I think there's like we're there, right? We want to participate, but I think like the devil's in the details and stuff, and like what's going to happen with the birds, figure that out.
So the key risk is if Marcel and I don't become the best of buddies. and that means that, hey, we're working great with the FAA and things are on track. But this is not just by the FAA. This is about localities. And every skyport that gets approved is going to be approved by a locality. And if we, exactly what you said, if we don't figure out the right way to work together to enable this investment to make sense, to do public good, to serve, to be an economic engine of productivity together, then we're stuck. It is going to come down to working really well with localities. That's something that we're getting better at. We're in 600 cities around the world. We are committed to great local interactions. Interactions in Los Angeles is completely different than in London or in in Tokyo. So we are committed to, at the local level, working this out so it serves the cities that we care about.
All right, one last question, and we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Curious to see if you can think of any spin-off businesses that could arise outside of just the point-to-point transportation from this technology that's being built, or secondary markets, or is there something else that will come out of this?
I'll jump in, but I talk too much. So already it has spun off. You know, our core investment at Uber is on the network management and airspace. And so as soon as we started investing in that, we were like, oh wow, you know, we can reuse this, because guess what? Uber Eats has turned into a multi-billion-dollar industry in a year and a half. Drone technology is getting there. It's reliant on autonomy, so it's not there yet. But we can reuse the software network management for a completely different use case to make sure you get McDonald's. Because you don't have a car, right? And you need it when you need it.
That's not
Oh, okay.
Well, I think it will also have a huge impact on healthcare, right? As you mentioned, the teams, the doctors. I think that would make a huge difference, because right now it always leaves on the same point and go back and forth. So I think if we have a distributed fleet, it would be much more efficient. Yeah, so that would be really good.
It's really cool if you just went like having a people ready for that I'd pay for it. Because that just seems cool.
so recreational.
Yeah, so complete every stupid thing you think of.
So you want more risk in the vehicles? Okay.
Yeah, because to me,
You want a roller coaster ride?
I do. I want to be like, you know, and really take it out for a spin.
I think, like, you know, just as on behalf of the city, cities are going to need more tools to manage stuff, right? And so, what is that ecosystem that enables for other companies to come in and provide those management services for cities?
Question. So we, the lady to the microphone. Oh, you raised your hand. I said right there.
So I want to direct this mainly at Mark and Marcel, but I want to preface it so that any of you guys can chime in on it. So in New York City in the 70s, they had a helicopter shuttling system. They used these Sikorsky helicopters. There was a horrible accident where one of the landing gear just broke over stress, killed everybody on the rooftop. A piece of the blade broke off, hit somebody on the ground, chopped their pieces. And it was a horrible accident. And since then, we haven't had anything like that. And Sao Paulo, actually, I believe, does have a helicopter kind of ride system for maybe people who can afford it. Another preface here is, you know, I remember reading in 2009, Tesla had released plans for the Model 3. So they had already planned everything. And they said, you know, we're a new company, the car industry is really hard to get into. So we're going to start with the luxury market, with the, you know, high-end cars, and work down from there. So, given that preface, and also another preface here, which is like, yeah, LA is great because buildings by law, except the Korean Airlines building, have to be built with heliports on top of them, right? And so that's just for you know, transportation for earthquakes or something, I believe. So, you know, this model has been done before, and it just seems to me that Uber is taking that sort of model for now, making it modern, safe, hopefully. And I don't know if there's any plans of how you're going to. I think it definitely is something that's a luxury market, and it would make sense if it were. I'm not criticizing, but like, do you guys have plans on how that can actually be? How I can afford that, right? And also like, you talk about a node-based model, but first of all, like Google Maps works a node-based model, like a weighted graph, where you have different pathways, different ways to traffic and whatnot. And this node-based model itself, depending on the air conditions or something, could have its own limitations, possibly. I don't know. definitely an expert.
Sorry, could you clarify your first question?
Yeah, so I'm just giving my premise here, right, when I'm saying that, like, for Mark here, this model that you guys are going with, the node-based model, right, what is actually new about it that you can maybe give details of it, and where are you guys headed from there to make this affordable for everybody? And to Marcel, given the comments I had earlier, is it really the city's right to question citizens' rights as to how fast they want to go or how they want to do things? Because we saw that, you know, they can stifle innovation. I just to propose that, right? Because, like, you know, we have a constitutional system in the United States, and you know, that says that it's my free will how fast I want to go. I just wanted to propose that, right? To see, because these are huge details that we got to figure out before we have a commercially viable solutions that will work for everybody, not just a small sector of society.
Okay, there's a lot of questions there. Okay, so going back to the 1970s and the Pan Am building accident with the Sikorsky, yeah, helicopters are not going to do this well. They have insanely high direct operating costs, and they have single points of failure, hundreds of single point failures, where these new aircraft are designed with 0 single point failures. They can literally fail multiple parts, and the aircraft can still fly. So fundamental difference in the aircraft, fundamental difference in the direct operating costs. That Sikorsky helicopter has a direct operating cost of thousands of dollars per hour. It's a multi-engine helicopter. What we're talking about is essentially hundreds of dollars per hour with a multi-engine redundancy. And to get to really beautiful economics, you need EVs. They're just so good at it because the cost of electricity and the cost of maintenance is dropped tremendously. You have an initial higher buy cost, but a much lower direct operating cost. So those are, that's one of the economic engines that makes this make so much sense. The other is the Uber demand funnel. We do 15 million trips a day. We can turn that demand funnel at different platforms so that we can achieve aggregation and pool to amortize the costs effectively to keep the utilization of those vehicles high. So there's so many other parts to the answer, but the last thing we want are millions and millions of vehicles that are utilized at 5% of the time. They're sitting in people's driveways or in parking lots or taking up space. We want fleets of vehicles that are used 90% of the time so that we can get to crazy low costs of well amortized vehicles. And the beauty is that it's synergistic with a sustainable model because the best operating costs are with EV fleets, on the ground and in the air.
What's your name, by the way?
Mila.
Mila?
Yeah.
Your question was LADOT's right to restrict someone from going as fast as they want.
Yeah.
I think it's LADOT's role to make sure that our streets are safe, right? And that people can not be scared of crossing the street and getting hit. And I think our key function is around road design, right? And we've done a really good job for decades on making our streets really fast, right?
The question is in the context of flying cars, right? Obviously the roads and people are going to walk in the air.
Not yet. That's a
Yeah.
you know? I mean, I think there's a role like for safety, right? Whether or not LADOT has that role in the air, right, is a question. Or if there's another, you know, the Department of Transportation. Right now, there isn't a paradigm that currently exists that says that we have that jurisdiction, but you know, fire and police, you know, certainly are going to have a role there. So, but I think we're open to talking about it.
You guys do make it up. Do you do the on-ramps or is that couch?
I'm gonna say let's couch it.
I was gonna say make the best on-ramps. Everywhere else you can't go in.
This side and the far side over there.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. This might be an oxymoron, a street legal flying car. If it's street legal, can it still fly?
Ryan, just
So I'd love to dismiss roadable aircraft and say the whole key to these making economic sense is that they're high productivity. So the last thing is that you want is a $2.5 million aircraft riding around in the street at 15 miles per hour. So there's different roadable aircraft and roadable flying cars that are trying to do everything. It doesn't make economic sense in my mind, and I'd love someone to show how it could. You really want to keep these expensive assets productive.
But can you physically make a street legal vehicle that can fly?
Yes, you could. It's a bad idea. It will be even more expensive, and it will be bad on the ground and bad in the air because it has to compromise across doing both of those
That's
things.
why we don't have amphibious cars.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hey, thanks for coming. One thing that I've talked about today is induced demand and how that's affecting mass transit and this kind of like well-documented, well-accepted sort of issue that we see with Uber and Lyft on one side and transit on the other side. And the evidence of that is from studies at Davis in 2007, 2018, and City of LA is working on adding a tax to the cars, and New York City's already doing it. I would call into question this notion where we're following utilization. I think that BMT is a kind of a more important thing to worry about as the price gets lower and lower, and we have more demand for Uber X, Uber Pool. People are like stopping, walking. They are going on trips they wouldn't have gone before. Are we kind of waiting for Uber Air to be the cure-all for this problem? And if not, then where do we go?
I'll jump in on that one. Yeah, so, I mean, first and foremost at DOT, we have a bunch of engineers who deal with our traffic signals, deal with our roads, deal with the street signs, but we have a team that also is specific around the transition from what we're measuring in terms of impacts, right? And so, for those of you who don't know, traditionally we've measured things as level of service, right? Like what is the congestion grade at each intersection? And the mitigations for those have been, okay, well, we got to improve that F rating at that intersection. Let's add a lane, because then we get more throughput for cars, and then we've solved the problem. But levels of service hasn't really solved this other question in terms of vehicle miles traveled, right? And so the state of California is doing that transition from what impacts you're measuring from levels of service to now look at vehicle miles traveled, because we want to mitigate that, right? There's a tide in GHG, induced demand, all that stuff that you're doing in terms of the negative externalities that come along with making mobility so easily accessible without understanding, what those impacts could be. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that is a big piece of what we're trying to understand as a city. How do different modes impact that, right? We don't, and going back to the preemption stuff, and I love my brothers over at Uber, but we don't know what the impact is of TNCs on our streets, right? They still make up a small percentage of overall trips in the region, but we have been preempted out of understanding what those travel impacts are, and that's something that currently resides at the state. And we're currently commenting on state comments in terms of how we should be able to access that data, because it's hard for us to understand what's happening on our streets, right? We know that gas tax is no longer going to be around, right? Like it's going to get phased out with the more and more efficiency to cars. But I'm totally about this whole question around induced demand, right? Like we're trying to solve a supply question here, but like we should be also looking at a demand, right? I mean, you guys, I don't know how long you guys have lived or been around UCLA, but we put like $1 billion in the 405, right? And it was like throwing a sponge in the ocean, right? And so, we're thinking about it in the city. And I think that, other folks are thinking about it. I know the express lanes that we want to angry fist so hard at, a lot of that revenue goes back into the parallel corridors for transportation improvements, right? To help other folks who don't have access to the town. And so we're thinking about it. And that is kind of the role of cities and government to continue to think about that and think about the policies that we can make.
one if it's quick, and then we'll do two if it isn't.
Just got a really quick question.
I want to talk to you about Induced Demand afterwards, so let's talk after.
Back row right there.
I have a question about the throughput. So the 405, so Colville Pass, has 200 cars a minute passing through it. Now, even with a distributed network of nodes, you may have 20 of them. Imagine, 10 per node just flying out of that node per minute. How do you handle that kind of volume without, darkening skies and it not being a niche thing that, Rachel Welding are able to take advantage of?
And so Uber Air is not about solving all of transportation. It is one new widget tool that we give to cities to solve the overall problem. One of the key things to realize is for every Uber Air that we put up there, that replaces 20 UberX on the ground in terms of productivity. So it is a big lever that we're using to get cars off the road, and we don't need to have nearly as many because these are such high productivity vehicles that implicitly must have cooling, must be filled, instead of having all these cars with one person in them. So for this to work, it naturally takes you to this synergistic solution that brings in sustainability, that brings in aggregation, that fits together as a collective whole actually to this induced demand problem. Because guess what? If you provided a new form of transportation, it's going to fill up if it's at a reasonable price, right? So city planners need the opportunity to redesign cities with a new widget that can let them do it idealistically. That is, 2-block little hubs, right? Cluster communities that can still, you can jump from one cluster to the other cluster, but otherwise it's walkable. I mean, wouldn't that be this incredible vision that we all work towards of cluster communities where we get this wonderful small town feel and collective unity, yet we can jump to another cluster very, very quickly. That's the vision that I'm working to enable, that I'm so excited about, that simply can't be achieved with other ways.
Last question.
Okay, last
You fit. You got the mic.
This guy in front. So low here. Hopefully this is not the one.
Hey, I'm Nick. I've flown a kite once, so. I have a question specifically about navigation systems. I know that, or I've read that as far as VTOL goes, it seems pretty like LiDAR and maybe optics, like it goes on that. But as far as navigation from point A to point B, it seems primarily based on GPS. Given that we've only got 3 GPS satellites, I think, in orbit, what if one of those are hacked? Like, what? I know this is a ridiculous French question, but what kind of redundancies are in place as far as navigation systems?
The FAA won't let us have complete reliance on GPS. We have to be able to operate in a GPS-denied environment. There's many different solutions to that, which we could get into discussing, but we will not have autonomous aircraft that are only dependent on GPS. The FAA will not let us go there and should not let us go there. So there's many other tech solutions that combine to essentially a belt and suspenders or multi-layered approach in terms of redundancy.
Can we please give it up for this amazing